Welcome to the Michael Simmons Show, where we help you create blockbuster content that changes the world and builds your business. We dive deep into the habits and hacks of today's top thought leaders. Now, here's the show.
I am really excited about today's guest, really excited. Her name is Jessica Hagy, and she has produced over 6,000 diagrams or images and 7 books. Her books have sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Her images have been seen millions and even tens of millions of times. She's been published in Forbes, in Quartz, in Business Insider. And even beyond all of those accomplishments, I really admire that Jessica has done craft innovation. So she's found a format of way of sharing images and that get across funny, complex topics in a very simple and funny way. And even at a deeper level, Jessica is a genius. You're about to see this. She's one of those people who really understands language at a very fundamental level, images at a fundamental level, and understands how to translate between them. Like, she breaks down sentences into their studs, then is able to turn the sentence into a mathematical formula, and then is able to turn that into a Venn diagram, a dot plot, a graph. And her way of thinking has really changed how my mind works, helped me be a better content creator, but also even a better thinker. So without further ado, let's jump in. So, Jessica, 6,000 visuals. How did you get to that? What was the schedule that you started with, and what is your schedule now?
So when I started drawing these, I was posting 2 or 3 a day. And then I started posting one officially every weekday and doing the rest as client work. So I've been posting one officially to my blog since 2006, every weekday.
One per day to your blog?
One per day.
Wow, that's gonna be
unless
hard.
Something catastrophic happens, like a computer dies or I have to fly somewhere. And yeah, that's been the system. And so over time, I've just accumulated this vast many shoeboxes full of diagrams.
And how did you determine that, okay, I'm going to go from, 0 to every once in a while sporadically to, okay, I'm going to do 2 to 3 per day and really make a commitment to this? What was it like? How old were you at that time? Where were you in life?
Let's see. I think I was about 28. And I just wanted to just put a blog up. I had read that every writer needs a blog, but I didn't want to do one of those, like, here's my breakfast situation. And so stealable office supplies, index cards fit that pretty well. And I had a
right away. How long did it take you to get the index cards?
Honestly,
right away, you just had that insight
I knew I could fit 3 on a scanner. And so that seemed like an efficient way to get images created back in 2006 before everybody had cell phones. And it was a sort of a creative constraint. So the smaller the space you have, the less you can ramble and the more just concise and succinct you have to be. So using that format was really sort of freeing and forced me into exactly the objects that I ended up making. And it was already sort of a built-in branding element so that if somebody saw an index card, it became associated with me,
right away you had, how did you, before you even had these ideas for these Venn diagrams on index cards, was there a version before that?
Nope. I started the blog on a Friday or a Wednesday. And the next week it was all over the internet and I had a literary agent and it was a thing. So I just kept doing it.
Wow. And I know you have an MFA in creative writing. Did you have a background what was your background in design at that point?
At that point, I was a copywriter at the Victoria's Secret headquarters outside of Columbus, Ohio. And I was selling underpants to little children. And it was almost as dark of a gig as writing how to get a subprime mortgage from JP Morgan Chase, which was the job I had directly before that. And so I was getting my MBA at night at the time I started the blog. And I think that really informed a lot of the graphic language of it, because that was so much more formal as opposed to underpants horoscopes.
And so you had a full-time job and you're getting an MBA at night and you start to do a blog. How did you find the time or make this a priority? I imagine you're pretty dead tired at the end of the day.
No, actually, I've always drawn and doodled and sketched things. And as far as sort of formalizing a doodle into something that can be shared was really just keep them in your pocket and don't keep them wrinkled. And as long as I have 20 seconds to scan and upload every day, I should be okay if I keep my art supplies on my person.
And so before you didn't necessarily have as much training in visual starts, but you did a lot of doodling.
Yeah, I mean, I worked with advertising enough that I was familiar with all of the design programs. And I mean, I knew enough to be dangerous, but not professional. And so a little bit more practice with this. And I built my own sort of, um, what would be the phrase? Sort of toolkit of things that I knew that I needed to do to get things up.
And one of the big parts of the writing journey or skill mastery in any domain is what I call the learning valley of death. That beginning part where you're trying to go from 0 to 1. And sometimes that could take years where you're good enough where you rise above the noise or months. But it sounds like for you, did yours work kind of take off right away? You mentioned you had a literary agent pretty soon.
Yeah, I think too, I'd already been writing as a job and trying to think of ways to quickly get an idea across. And that had been my gig for almost a decade at that point. So I think I had that skill. I just had to put it into a form that I could own.
And okay. So yeah, you had the writing, you had the training in the writing, and then also just the doodling. So you found a way to combine two skills you already knew into something that's really unique online. And let's see here. One thing is the drawings are very simple, but the ideas are really deep. And I was curious, look, how much is reading and research a part of your process to find material, and how much time you spend on that per day?
I think, oh gosh, per day, I'm always reading at least 2 different books. So
What are you reading right now? Curiosity.
right now I'm reading, if you guys are at all into the idea of fungus, it's called Entangled Life.
Huh.
It's fascinating. It's about how fungus is in everything and shapes everything we do. And then I also subscribe to Granta, which is
Granta?
Yeah, it's a really good periodical, like a literary magazine. I think the editors are in London now.
Yeah, really interesting. I feel like the fact that you have one book on literary magazine and another one on fungus, I feel like represents your, also the topics you jump across. And I wouldn't be surprised to see those diverse topics in your drawings.
Yeah, I think I don't really confine myself to any one or two topics, but yeah, when I find something that's really interesting to me, I sort of latch onto it. Like my Velcro hooks are like, oh, I'm sticking with this for a while. And I can really just sort of get into something.
And there's often a tension between, let's say, focus. I feel like there's an idea that, okay, I have one niche, I should focus there. On the other hand, I feel like there's more people who are being followed for their diverse interests, and you may not just for what they're interested in at one point. Has there ever been a tension for you to feel like, okay, I should focus on just one thing, and I'm jumping around way too much?
No, I think the one thing that I have found is that editors either have an idea of exactly what they want me to do, or they want to box me into a certain set of subjects. And because I am named Jessica and not John, I've been hired to write for a lot of women's publications, which is the most frustrating thing because I'd rather write about fungus and bizarre ways things work. And I've been freelance for too long, so I really don't understand the absolute current topics of women in the workplace. So that's always a tough one when they're kind of like, this is who you are and this is what you're going to talk about. And it's like, but not really.
Yeah.
So I can fake that pretty well, but it is a little bit awkward.
So it's not necessarily your readers, but if you're working with editors or publications, you're feeling more boxed in there.
I think my editors are on the most Most of them are pretty much like, here's a topic, run with it, go where you want. But
Mm.
sometimes it's very stay in this lane that I need you to stay in. And that can really take sort of the fun and spontaneity about out of my work. So I have to sort of thread that needle carefully to get good work done.
How do you think about threading? In this course, we do talk about as a Venn diagram the different things. Of one is, let's say, product market fit. That there's a
Mhm.
market, they have needs, and you're trying to solve those needs, which is,
Yeah.
and then there's also soul market fit of what you're really interested in, and it's hard to predict where it's going to go. Sometimes the dots don't connect looking forward. How do you thread the needle, or anything you've learned about threading that?
Sometimes it's all about just like picking your battles. Like I think we had a conversation once where it was, if you know what the person you're working with is really after, it's easier to do that. Like some people are like, I want to save the world, and other people are like, I want to make $12 on this item every day. And figuring out who you're working with and having enough projects going at once that you can be cool with doing a couple of those little tiny ones and then not getting super bogged down in somebody's I'm going to save the world plan. So I
Yeah.
think having a lot of things going at once helps me to see that none of them are absolute make or break.
Hmm. Yeah, there's this theory within creativity research by Howard Gruber around networks of enterprise, that a lot of the most creative people, they're not just working on one thing all the time. They're working on a whole network of ideas that cross fertilize and pollinate each other. And if one hits a dead end, then the other one's always there.
Yeah.
And
The other, I think we talked about this too once, is the lottery ticket theory of creative work, where everything you make is sort of a lottery ticket and you don't know if it's going to like turn into something huge and famous. But the more you make, the more chances you have of one of them sticking. And I think that happens too, because sometimes I'll draw something and I'll be like, that is perfect. And nobody will like it. And I'll draw something like just sort of a throwaway, like, and it gets shared like 7,000 times. So
yeah, how how do you think about the process of what it takes to get a blockbuster? So you mentioned just a little bit there, and
yeah.
output there, but how do you factor in learning that you're getting better in each time you create a drawing?
Yeah, I
And
think the just over time you sort of just get this discernment for what will work and what will stick and how that sort of stuff happens. And the other thing I found is the timing of posting things. And it changes like slowly, but it's always been, if I can get something out in the mornings, it's better than in the evenings. And I think that's
Interesting.
just a function of time zones and like who's online when and when you're going to hit that population.
And in the course, we have this idea of 25-minute posts, or the shorter posts build up to longer posts, build
Yeah.
up to something longer. And so you've had this model where you have these short posts on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and
Hmm.
then you have a bunch of articles in magazines that Thrive, Business Insider, other places that combine those images, and then you have 7 books. How do you think about, did I capture how you view it? And then how do you think about taking what goes, how those relate to each other?
I always think of every single thing I do is in some way an advertisement for every other single thing I do. So if I have,
Body of work.
yeah, so everything that is definitely mine is definitely pointing people toward my home pages and Googling me and figuring things out. And so every time I put something else out there, everything else is sort of fed on it. So it's not like anything exists entirely on its own, but everything does have to sort of link back to itself.
Do you try to create a body of work in advance? In other words, okay, there's a bunch of topics in one area, they seem to be interesting, I'm going to combine them.
Mhm.
Or is a lot of it often it's just you connecting the dots looking backwards, and you're just really just following your curiosity
I
100%?
think a lot like the more curious I get, the more satisfying that is for my readers. So if I were to just have stuck to only writing about business topics, I don't think I would have been able to do as many of the really interesting projects as I've gotten to do. And because I do sort of go all over the place, that every now and then I'll just attract a different niche market that'll just find me all of a sudden. So
Oh,
this month,
interesting.
this month I did a podcast with a coaching organization, and now all these coaches are using my work in their presentations. And before that, it was the future of education and how UNESCO is looking at what schooling is going to look like in 5 years. And so I'm part of those subsets too. And I think because I am flexible and can draw all sorts of topics, I get to work with all sorts of different people. Like in advertising, one of the cool things is that when you get a new client, you get to learn about an entirely new industry. And I always thought that was really super fascinating. And you're not hired because you have a specialty in an industry. You're hired because you have a specialty in creative work. So doing more lots of different industries, I think is something that if you're good enough at your creative stuff, you get to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's one hand, you're cross-pollinating ideas across fields, but also from an audience building perspective, it really sounds like you're able to pick up people from different fields as well, versus if you're just in one,
Oh yeah.
you're missing out on a lot of people.
And a lot of times I don't even know who's going to really latch on to a topic. So I can draw something about timeliness or time zones or something just kind of universal, and it'll latch on to one subset of some industry. And all of a sudden it's like 17 postal carriers followed you today. And I'm like, why'd that happen?
Yeah, it's really interesting. What's been most surprising about that in terms of, I noticed that too, if I write, kind of obvious, if I write about learning, then, people who are learning coaches or teachers are going to share it and things like that.
Mhm.
Have you been surprised, just now that you have so much data on seeing people share your post and why they share your posts? Have
Mhm.
you been surprised at why people share your posts?
I think I'm always surprised when something goes like really, really viral, and there's really not a lot of rhyme or reason to those specific items because they tend to be all over the place. Like Santa abusing his elves, like somehow that became like a thing, and there's no industry that attached to that. But watching how people do share has become really interesting too, because over time it used to be like everyone posted their own version, and now it's just links around. So the retweeting and the sharing on Facebook is a whole different sort of way to see how people tag each other.
Hmm. Have you been any surprise or things that people wouldn't expect when you see people annotate your images with their own comments or tag people?
Um, I have there was a thing that went around like 4 years ago where it was a meme of fixed it for you. And people would take my diagrams and like change it somehow and then say fixed it for you. And and my readers would just swarm on those people and be like, don't you dare. And I was like, but that stopped happening. And I think it just became sort of a tedious meme. But
Right,
just
right.
watching how things do get changed and knowing that if you do have like a loyal reading base, you don't have to do anything if there's some sort of weird, sketchy, trollish behavior because your people will come to your rescue.
I'm going to jump a little bit. Actually, before I jump, if you had to break down, I find it interesting of why people share things in general. And we've talked in the course in titles about a formula of COCA. Something is counterintuitive or surprising.
Hmm.
The second one wouldn't apply to as much your type of writing, but outcome based that helps them achieve an outcome.
Yeah.
Um, Curiosity is the C, and then authority. If you had to break down of the core reasons why people share in general, or your unique insight into why people share, why do you think that is?
I think I try to draw things that people can look at and say, yeah, that's true, or yeah, that's me. And if I can get to that deep sort of universality of something, then I know that I've put something out there that people can get quickly and say like, yeah, that's me, that works. And those are the things that people share the most, I think, or something that's like, oh, this is brutally true. And if it's
Mm.
just sort of a pun or a silly thing, that gets some traction, but never as much as something that people will like pin on the wall of their office.
What do you feel like it is about a brutal or really deep truth that the way you're doing it, or why is that the thing people share?
I think, well, I sometimes like a really funny thing will get a lot of traction, but also just sort of like reading the room of the times. Right now, things that are a little bit like hard pills to swallow type stuff is getting a lot more traction. And I think that just might be sort of a zeitgeisty sensation that people are looking for something a little more bite as opposed to something like fun and soft. Like cat pictures are not taking over the internet right now. And I wish they would. I wish they'd come back.
That was a 2012 thing. How do you think about one of the things we talk a lot about in this is in our course is number one is output, but then number two is feedback loop or a way of improving. And you just
Mhm.
talked about just reading the zeitgeist of the times. Uh, you're obviously getting a lot of feedback since all your work is out there. So you might be just taking it unconsciously, but
Yeah.
is there a way that you think about feedback and getting feedback or improving on your post?
If anything is very specific and I hear it more than 3 times, it's probably true.
Hmm.
If things are, if I hear the same thing over and over and over again, that's something to pay attention to. If it's some one-off random comment, it might be hilarious or it might be mean or it might be something. But usually the one-offs that don't fit into a set with other bits of feedback are sort of bad data, I guess, if you're going to really streamline things. But yeah, you can learn a lot just by kind of keeping your ear to your own replies.
What would be an example of something you've heard 3 times and you're like, oh, could be really big. And then you start to focus on that and you notice, oh, wow, there's something here.
Um, gosh, what is a good recent example of that? Oh, I had a diagram that was failure of imagination and the triumph of misery. And it was when people say that's just the way things are,
Hmm.
and people sharing things that way. And then they were saying, okay, so if we have this ennui, what is the word for that? What is the word for that? And I was like, I don't know. And I've been looking for that word for a couple weeks.
Hmm.
Like there should be some sort of long Germanic word that
Covers this
captures what that
idea.
sensation is.
What's your process for looking for that word? How are you thinking about it?
You know what? I just because I don't speak German, but I got a new phone and it has this translation program in it. So I've been throwing things in there just to see what I get and throwing that into Google Translate to see like if there's a good like break in translation, if there's something funny or interesting. And that's been a really like kind of a new thing for me to just like play with words until they break and see what I can get out of it.
Can
But I
you
think
can you say that in a different way, or what do you mean by you play with the word till it breaks, or there's a break in translation?
so let's say like something gets lost or something gets changed or it goes from pet to dog to beast to dragon, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, is a dog a dragon and how did you get there and what are the links that bring that back around? Or like, oh, these are dinosaur bones, no, it's a dragon, like how do you know? It's the same thing, like that's in like 1700. So playing with something until you kind of get so far away from the original idea that you're somewhere else entirely is sort of a cheap brainstorming method, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I So when we had our call together, I could really see how you did that. Like you really followed a string and then just went in a lot of different places. So I look
Yeah, I'm
forward
very
to.
tangential.
Yeah, yeah. And on your routine side, so you have one image per day. Uh,
Hmm.
what are the steps to do that? Starting from getting inspiration to writing down. I know you keep journals with lists to then
Hmm.
kind of create the visual.
I'll just sort of start sketching things out, and sometimes I'll draw something 4 or 5 times until I get the right tension in the image.
Hmm.
But yeah, really, it is kind of taking a word and playing with a word until you get an idea out of it, or taking a statement and really massaging the statement into a visual.
And so for you, in terms of you'll start with the inspiration, and you mentioned before you're obviously reading a lot before you mentioned quote books.
Hmm.
So how will you come across that word often or that idea? Is it just through your reading or?
Yeah, I mean, and like the rule of three online too. If you see something that keeps coming up and keeps coming up, but it's not like Trump has COVID, like, what do I draw about that? Like, I have to take that as a tangent and be like, okay, so this topic relates to this many people today in this way. Why? And just sort of put bits and pieces together until I can pull a few words out and draw something that's related to the topic, but not directly related to the topic.
Okay. So, for example, the big news this morning is Trump has COVID. But when you see that, you're
Yeah.
like, okay, that's everyone that's interested.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that? So, you're looking for tangents or unique
Yeah.
angles. To,
And half the time I do that, I end up with drawings that aren't related to that at all, but are interesting to me for different reasons. So I was doing, where did I put that? I had one right before I hopped on with you guys that was like, you can't go on a play date if you bite and kick and scream, or if you don't wear your mask. So like, how does that totally work? And where's that all going? And are we in the bad place? And lots, I've just been, it's early, but I'm getting there.
and for let's say you take an image and you start the day, is it normally you start and end on one day on an image, or it's more you're working in 5 images at once and then
Always like at least 6 or 7 somethings in the works. If you could see my desk here, it's pretty chaotic, but
of different note cards.
Yes, but I know where everything is. So
and so you'll have 6 or 7, and then you wake up in this morning, you saw Trump has COVID, and then you looked at the different things and then started just using your technique of playing with the ideas or having a word and trying to just iterations off of it.
Yeah. And also just seeing sort of sometimes the main topic that's out there that's running around, people just need a total break from that because it gets overwhelming quickly.
Yeah.
And like today, it might be, I don't want to post anything super topical. I want to post something absolutely weird and silly. And the weird and silly might be the break people need from the just onslaught of topical information.
And then these are I think my final question here before we actually jump into the exercises. And I'm going to feel free to everyone to post your questions in chat as well. But how do you think about getting better? So I've been in a situation before when I was in college, I did 1 post per day, and then in 2012. And I feel like my mistake, I was just too focused on the output and I wasn't actually getting better. And just curious. And sorry about my cat in the background. When you start talking, then I'll use the cat.
No, I wasn't sure if that was yours or mine.
But so how do you get better? And I'm going to turn off my video for a second.
Yeah. So I know that I have to keep reading and staying on top of things. And so that was part of that need to get better when I was a copywriter, was getting my MBA. And then in 2016, I went back and got the MFA. And I think that helped a lot. And really just sort of, I don't know what I don't know. So I need other people to tell me things that I wouldn't find on my own. And as curious as I can be, I am habitual and I am curious in the same directions a lot of times. So getting other people to guide me a little bit is always really helpful. I think if I run into I'm getting stale moment, I really have to sort of turn to people other than me to give me information.
All right. Got a question here. Let's see. From James Ashcroft. When Jessica has a nascent idea, how does she capture the idea's essence to noodle on it later?
That is totally just a jot of a word. So I really think it's word-based first and then image-based. So you start with the words and then you can play with the image.
I know we're going to go into that a little bit deeper later, but can you tell a little bit more about what that means? So if you take a word and then you did already a little bit, but can you give another example of that?
Sure. So let's just say the word is lint. Like for some reason, lint is just a fascinating, weird, hilarious little word to me. And I'm going to have it and I'm going to think about it. I'm going to think, where is it? What is it? Why is it there? Like, what's it made of? What are the synonyms for it? Who caused it? What's it related to? What are the actions it invokes? And I'll just build sort of a pile of words until I have a story that I can sort of swoop through. And then from there, I'll put a sentence together and then I'll draw that sentence out.
Okay. Wow. That was interesting on a few levels. So I've never really thought about words as interesting. I've been more in the ideas are interesting, but what makes an idea interest or a word interesting to you? Like lint. Yeah.
You never know, but you have that sensation where if you say a word like 100 times, it feels foreign and unreal.
Yeah.
I think every word, like if it gives you that sort of like ASMR tingle, then you're like, ooh, what is that? And playing with it and seeing like what it can offer you is really sort of ooh, that's fun. Or like what's in a magazine? Is it a gun magazine? Is it a fashion magazine? Like what is that word as like a lot of different letters and feels stretchy. So
Really
like
interesting.
you can play with not just a topic, but a single word in the topic. And sometimes that can really stretch out too. And it goes from one word to like dozens and they just branch out.
And how do you think about the story around a word? If you said that to me, I would just think, oh, the story is like how somebody coined the word. But what is it
Yeah.
or that stretchy?
I think, like Oxford English Dictionary searches are always like super cool. Like, how did that word come out? And like the first time somebody said it was in like 1418 on accident. And then but really like finding a way that that word relates to people right now or a way that that fits into their lives is one of those like, oh, wow, that's hilarious.
So there's almost like it's almost like words have a personality that you're getting to know, like you're like a person almost. You're almost talking about a word like a person, I guess.
Yeah. And I think as long as you're sort of kind and generous with with what you're doing, it keeps your work from getting too mean, but it does
Right.
keep it kind of like if I'm in a really wholesome mood, that word is going to end up being like kind of a wholesome joke. But if I'm in kind of like a feisty mood, it's going to be about like how dryers catch on fire.
Right, right. Yeah, interesting. So your mood factors into it.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll just draw a set of things and I'll look back and I'll be like, I was just crabby. Like, I'm glad I didn't post any of those. And then I'll just come back and do something.
And how can a word like I wouldn't normally think about a word as funny.
Uh huh.
How did like what like when you hear lint, what makes that funny to you?
I mean, belly button lint, lint everywhere. Like it goes in your dryer. It's part of your clothes. Like, are you made of lint? Is there skin in it? Like, ew. Like it just gets really, really complicated. Really fast. And all of a sudden, it's like, are there tardigrades crawling around? And like, are there creatures in my house? And
Wow, that's really fascinating. That's like a depth of curiosity that I feel like I view myself as a curious person, and then I'm just like, okay, I'm not very curious when you say that. Uh,
it it kind of it reminds me of like a comedian. They're incredibly brilliant and they find these little situations or little feelings that no one really notices, but they have their ear to the ground all the time for strange feelings or emotions or situations. And it seems like as a writer you kind of have your feelers up for words that create a sensation that's a little that breaks away from the other noise of words in your life. I mean,
yeah, that's a good way to put it with the feelers out. Because if you're always sort of just like, what? Like being open to like hearing that and sort of like awkwardly pausing and being like, I'm writing that
how do you think about if we wanted to like when you were saying that? It's like part of me was like, I want to be able to think about all those things and feel those things with words. How would you recommend developing that taste of or it's almost like a lens of seeing on the world that's very it's like a microscopic lens.
Yeah, I think one, just read whatever you want all the time. And it can be really goofy, silly stuff. And when you do find a word that one you don't know or just sounds good to you, like lately there's been a thing about how all these terrible medical terms sound like really beautiful girls' names, like chlamydia. And that whole thing is like one of those, oh wow, that's really cool. Like how do we name things and why don't these names stick and like what are hilarious names for people and putting things like that together, just like that word just sounds like what does that word sound like? And playing with things like that and letting yourself be super goofy about it.
That's really funny. What is your I know you have children and Are you constantly recognizing words and your husband, and they're like, do they get it? Are they in on it? Are they noticing things, or are you a weirdo to them?
I think I've always been talking to my small child as if he were like a large person, because if I can just speak like this constantly, the little baby would go to sleep. So he has since become he's a very articulate little person, and he's always asking what words mean. And he's very desperate to know what the C word is right now.
Yeah.
And so we've been giving him lots of different words that start with C, and he's sort of sussing out that we're lying to him. And he's very like very on the track of listening to how adults speak. And even on his Zoom yesterday, like I heard how his linguistics are echoed by our linguistics. And he said to his teacher, so I think what you're trying to say, I'm just going to recap your point. And I was like, ew.
How old is he?
He's 7.
He's 7. Oh my God. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Like they're living in the same soup we are.
This is jumping topics a little bit, but in the course, we talk about the power of, just 80/20s, first of all, of that.
Yeah.
Writing is a huge thing, lots of different skill sets. So trying to find things that are higher leverage. So number one is the value hooks of the title and the image that people see that's the first thing. 80% of people are going to see that and not even read the article. So, and then even within that, in the course, we talk about the idea of trademark words, ideas. So when you have an idea, coining a word.
So this is a book from the 80s. Do you guys remember these?
No, never seen that.
Okay, so it was on like a late night show, and they'd make up words like Nurgle, a person who leaves his Christmas lights up all year. So these are totally like your like portmanteau, build your own word and sort of own it. Like
yeah.
But yeah, I only just interjected that because it was on my desk.
Yeah. How do you think about coining words for yourself, or just what's the process there of, you talked a little bit about how you feel like sometimes there's a word that should exist. But how do you think about it for maybe even stating it in a way where other folks hear when they have knowledge and they feel like a word should exist? How would you recommend coining a word or thinking about it?
So you talked about sort of counterintuitive ideas and how that sort of like, that does get your brain like, wait, what? And I think putting oxymorons together and then explaining them is super fun. Like that's always the power of industrial laziness. Okay. Like, let's just go from there and like take that as a phrase and like riff on it long enough. And all of a sudden, like you've got a Malcolm Gladwell outline, right?
Can you give it how would you go from industrial laziness to Malcolm Gladwell outline?
Yeah. So like, okay, industrial laziness is just like choosing days that you're not going to do something. You're going to recharge your brain. And I'm bullshitting right now. I'm just making these up.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're going to recharge your brain and we're going to like put this out and everyone's going to work 4 days a week instead of 7. And you know what? It'll be full employment just because we all get lazy and creative at once. Boo. Now let's sell it as a book. Like, I don't know. But yeah, like playing with contrasting things will always supply some sort of argumentative fuel.
Perfect.
Thanks for listening to The Michael Simmons Show. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. If you found value in today's episode, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast player.